Hi, everybody, and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode, we're going to do a top 10. The topic of the top 10: Raw After Wrestlemania Moments. Now, if you've watched wrestling for a long time, you know that the Raw, the night after WrestleMania, is usually the night they reboot and set what's going to happen for the next year. It's where debuts happen, it's where returns happen. This is my list of my 10 favorite things that happened on Raws after WrestleMania. Now, starting off, number 10 from 2012, Brock Lesnar making his triumphant return. Brock had been out of the company since WrestleMania 19 actually. No, was it 20? Either way. He'd been out of the company for a number of years, about 6-7 years at this point. He went to New Japan, he went to MMA, he tried out for the Minnesota Vikings. And this was Brock, after setting himself up as being a major star in UFC, even more so than he was in WWE, coming back and challenging John Cena. Basically, he came out at the end of the show. It was a cool moment. It was a cool thing. I like Brock Lesnar. I've always liked Brock Lesnar since his initial run. And I really enjoyed the fact that he was finally coming back. This was a lot like last year, if you're a newer fan. This was kind of the same feeling and same vibe as CM Punk coming back, because no one really ever expected Brock Lesnar to come back. There was rumors the whole time, just like CM Punk, but no one ever expected it because of the way it ended. Now, coming off of that, our number 9, talking about things that a lot of wrestling fans never expected, especially if you were alive during and watching during the Monday Night Wars. Goldberg debuting for WWE in 2003, basically coming out confronting The Rock, showing us that he's going to be a big-time player in WWE as well, coming off being basically a legend in WCW. I've said it before, and I've said it 1,000 times, I'm not a huge fan of Goldberg. I do understand his appeal, and this was a really big deal, because even during the invasion angle, you didn't get the guys like the NWO. You didn't get Ric Flair. You didn't get Goldberg or Sting even. You got kind of the lesser talents. This was where the franchise, for the last couple of years of WCW, Goldberg finally comes to WWE. And we get him right off the bat. He's in a program with arguably one of the two, if not the biggest wrestler at the time, one of the two biggest wrestlers at the time. So this was an awesome debut. Really cool entrance here. I enjoyed this, even though I don't like Goldberg. Coming from that, number 8, speaking on The Rock, coming out of WrestleMania 27, 2011, The Rock and John Cena having a confrontation, basically setting 1 year in advance for WrestleMania 28, the main event for that show. And I don't think this has been done. This was never done before this, and it hasn't been done since. There have been times where it's been obvious what they were going to do in the next year's show, but nothing ever was said, meet me at WrestleMania next year, until this year, and nothing's been done after that. WrestleMania 28, absolutely one of my favorite WrestleManias. I got to attend it live, which adds to it. Plus the fact that this was kind of the similar vibe to The Rock versus Hulk Hogan, where you had the face of one generation fighting the face of another generation. The Rock versus John Cena was that in 2011. And I think, a lot of people overlooked the match. They kind of gloss over it. I thought it was a good, solid match that came out of it. And I thought the build, I kind of wish they didn't do the back-to-back just because of the once-in-a-lifetime thing of it. But I get it. Each guy gets a win. It makes sense to me. Like I said, you got a guy like The Rock coming out And at this point, he had been back and forth. He hadn't been back in WWE for a couple of years, challenging the guy who's been the guy for WWE for a number of years at that point. Just an awesome moment. Now, our number 7, talking about awesome moments. 2014, Paige debuts and wins the Divas Championship from AJ Lee. This, to me, and a lot is said about the women's revolution, a lot is said about the 4 horsewomen in NXT. Paige was the delineation to me. She was the woman who changed from the quasi-divas area, or the divas era, to the women's wrestling era. And not that there wasn't women's wrestlers, just talked about AJ Lee, she was a fantastic one. Beth Phoenix, fantastic. All through the divas era, there was a change in the guard, a change in the way that women were portrayed coming out of this. Paige, to me, I think is a catalyst. I don't think Paige quite gets as much credit as she deserves. Her career was obviously cut short due to neck injury, and a lot of people put that credit on, and rightfully so, the 4 horsewomen of NXT, Sasha, Bianca, Bayley, Sasha, Bayley, Charlotte, and Becky Lynch. I said Bianca because I'm thinking of her match with Becky Lynch just a few days ago at WrestleMania. But, yeah, they get a lot of the credit for putting women's wrestling back on the map. I think Paige was doing that just a little bit before them. The stuff that Paige was doing, her and Emma down in NXT on the main roster here, I think she's one of the real catalysts for making women's wrestling a viable thing on WWE television. The only reason I rank this so low is just because her career, unfortunately, we didn't get that legendary run. Technically, if everything worked the way it should, Paige should still be one of the people that's in their main event in WrestleMania. We should be seeing Paige versus Bianca Belair, Paige versus Ronda Rousey, or Paige versus Charlotte, or anything you could think of. Any one of the top women's wrestlers in the world versus Paige, she should be right in there with them. It's a shame that she's not. Now, coming off of that, we get our number 6. One of my personal favorites from 1996, Mankind debuting in the WWF at the time. We see him earlier in the night. I believe he wrestled Bob Holly. I'm not 100% sure. I think it was Bob Holly. But the main thing, after a couple weeks of vignettes, we get Mankind finally debuting. The main thing he does, at the end of the show, Mankind attacks The Undertaker. So we see what is probably the thing that these two guys are mostly remembered for, the feud between Undertaker and Mankind, a legendary feud in pro wrestling. It elevated Mick Foley's career, elevated Undertaker's career. I have talks with my friend. I have a friend named Gary. If you watched this show way back, Gary was on it with me here. He's still one of my really good friends. And we always talk about how before Mankind, The Undertaker was a different wrestler. He was an attraction. After Mankind, he kind of became a more serious, better wrestler, better in-ring wrestler. And that's no knock on The Undertaker previous to this, because he was absolutely one of the biggest stars in wrestling. I just think that Mick Foley pushed him into a different stratosphere where he hadn't been before this feud. And this was the beginning of that legendary feud. One of the legendary runs in all of wrestling, Mick Foley's WWF run. 3-time world champion. And this is where he debuts. This is where it started from. And I had trepidation. I didn't want to like it going in because they were changing Cactus Jack, who was the character that I was a huge fan of, that I enjoyed. And they were changing him, and they were making him something different. But he found a way to make it work, and that's why Mick Foley is so beloved, because he can make anything work, really. Now, coming from that, our number 5, just a year later, in 1997, the day after WrestleMania 13, the day after the Bret Hart double turn with Steve Austin. We get, as a rolling thing throughout the show, Bret Hart's explanation as to why he turned. And this, to me, was a masterclass on taking someone that's a beloved babyface and making them a heel, and then also the story that they were telling. I think this is Bret Hart's best work of his career. This run where he was anti-America that started on this night, where he was beloved in Canada and hated in America, and they seem to go back and forth on Raws every other week between America and Canada at this time. I thought that was the best work that Bret Hart's ever done. I think Bret's a great talent. He's absolutely one of the legendary wrestlers of all time. His heel work in 1997 as the anti-American character was top-notch. And the thing about it was, he had what a classic heel should have. He had a point of view that you can understand, that's grounded in reality, that you can believe that this guy really believes, and he ran with it. And I thought it was absolutely awesome. I loved every part of this, and I loved this explanation. Like I said, it was a running thread throughout the show, and it made such a compelling episode of Monday Night Raw. Now, coming from that, our number 4, Bret Hart's biggest rival from 2010, Shawn Michaels, the Heartbreak Kid's in-ring retirement. We seen the night before The Undertaker retired him in his retirement match. On this night, we get to see Shawn come out and quote-unquote get his flowers, get the recognition for his career. This was just an amazing moment. This was one of those fan service, feel-good moments that the fans get to cheer one of their legends for one more time before he rides off into the sunset. Again, we've seen him break the retirement since then. We've seen him wrestle that awful Saudi show. But this was the end of the Shawn Michaels in-ring career for all intents and purposes. And it was a great way to let a legend to go out, let him have that spot, let him have that moment in the ring. Now, coming off of that, our number 3, a guy that gets compared to Shawn Michaels an awful lot. From 2013, Dolph Ziggler cashing in the Money in the Bank. This is my favorite cash-in of any of the Money in the Bank cash-ins, and it's that by a long shot. And don't get me wrong, I've enjoyed a lot of cash-ins. This one, though, the crowd was so hyped for it. This is probably, to me, this was one of the really things that cemented this era of wrestling. He cashes in on Alberto Del Rio. It's just such an insane thing. The crowd was so ready for Dolph Ziggler to be a world champion. Unfortunately, since then, the WWE has fumbled the ball on him, and he could have been, I think he could have been this generation's Shawn Michaels. He's a great wrestler. He really is, and he has a great talent, and he's a great personality. I don't know what the disconnect was, why WWE hasn't made him more prominent, but hey, even with that, he's had a hell of a career. To me, again, like I said, for the moment, for what it was, this ranks rather high for me. So coming from that, our number 2, much like I said with number 4 from 2008, Ric Flair retires, letting the fans have one more send-off from the absolutely top wrestler in the history of wrestling. There's the only argument I'll ever listen to for Ric Flair being the greatest wrestler of all time is Terry Funk. And that's it. And there's no other wrestler that's in that echelon. No other wrestler has done more in and for wrestling than Ric Flair. I know in 2022 Ric Flair is a problematic character, a problematic person. However, he is the GOAT. He is the Michael Jordan of wrestling. He's the Babe Ruth of wrestling. Whatever your nom de plume is for the greatest, he's that guy. And this was, again, just a beautiful moment to let Ric Flair come out, get the respect he so deserves. And you got to see an early Charlotte, because Charlotte was there with him. Just an awesome way to send off one of the absolute legends. And much like Shawn Michaels, I mentioned before, Rick did wrestle after this. But this is what everybody thinks of when they think of the end of Rick's career. Now, before we get into number one, I do a little something here called the best of the rest. Basically, it's stuff that I considered for the list but didn't quite make the list. First up, from 2014, the final speech of the Ultimate Warrior. I didn't make this list. It's a legendary moment. It absolutely is. I'm not a fan of the Warrior as a wrestler, not a fan of Warrior as a person. I cannot deny that he is one of the most beloved characters in the history of wrestling, especially for his era. And this was the Ultimate Warrior basically hours before he passed away, coming out and addressing the fans. He had been in a contentious relationship with the WWE for a long time. A lot of bad blood between the two. This was a chance, again, much like Shawn Michaels, much like Ric Flair, for the fans to show the Ultimate Warrior just how much they loved him. Again, I'm not personally a fan of the guy, but at this moment was such a great moment that it had to be considered. To me, I couldn't add it to the list just because I've never thought the guy was that great as a wrestler, and I never thought as a person he was great. So to me, that's why he didn't make the list proper. But it is a great moment. Next up, Brock Lesnar from 2002 making his debut, laying absolute waste. I want to say it was I know it's Spike Dudley, and I want to say it was either Wrestling Crash Holly or Hurricane Helms. I'm doing all of this off of memory, but he came out like an absolute monster. Came out with Paul Heyman, instant credibility, instant destruction. You knew this was a guy that was to be contended with, and you knew that this was an important debut just because he was standing with Paul Heyman. Just an amazing debut and an amazing start to one of the legendary runs in all of pro wrestling. Now, last but not least, in our best of the rest here, from 2001, Triple H and Steve Austin joining together to begin the two-man power trip. This, to me, if Triple H does not get injured, I think this is the most interesting storyline that we lost to injury. Because I think the two-man power trip would have been a hell of a run. It would have been just amazing to see what those two guys could have done together with a fully healthy Triple H, with Steve Austin just newly being mentored a heel. Because of that, because we didn't get to see it go on, that's why it kind of didn't make the list here. Now, before we get into our number one, please hit that like button, share. If you think I left something off the list, I put something up too high, something down too low, let me know down here in the comments. And if you haven't, if you like what you're seeing here, please hit the subscribe button and ding that notification bell. Looking at the analytics for the channel, 65% of people that watch these videos are not subscribed. That's crazy. If you like what I'm doing, throw me a subscribe. Help me out. But anyway, I digress. Going into our number one moment, and I may have telegraphed this. I just did a video about the entire show the other day. From 1998 the reload and reboot of D-Generation X, Shawn Michaels being excommunicated from the group by Triple H taking leadership, X-Pac joining, which I think is one of the great moments in the history of the Attitude Era. I think it's one of the great moments in the history of WWE. The New Age Outlaws joining at the end of the show, signifying a new era in WWF at the time, going forward, signifying a new version of DX, the DX Army as it's been called. I thought this was absolutely amazing. I think the 1998 Raw After WrestleMania is the best Raw After WrestleMania. 2014, obviously it has two moments that were on here, is another really great one. But to me, there was nothing better, nothing that defined the generation more than the 1998. We've seen The Rock take over the nation on this same show. We see the fallout from Steve Austin winning his first world championship. We see the reformation of D-Generation X with Shawn Michaels being gone from the group. It's amazing to see all of that just happen on one show, and that to me, that moment is going to live on forever. I think it's one of the moments that really cemented that WWF was going to win the Monday Night War. And just an amazing moment. It's something that I think I can't heave enough praise onto that moment. With all that being said, let me know what you think. Again, put it down in your comments if you have another moment that happened on a Raw After WrestleMania you like better. If you think I put something down low, something high, let me know. And if you watched this far, I know you're enjoying this video. I know you enjoy what we do. If you watched all the way to the end, put Raw down in the comments to let me know you did. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this is my top 10 Raw After WrestleMania moments.